Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mozenda. Welcome to this new webinar today. We are excited to announce our new features, Notify Actions. This is a first in Mozenda's history. We're doing several things that are pretty exciting. But let me go ahead and introduce our presenter today. It's Ben Alexander. He's Technical Training Manager here at Mozenda, and I am Mike Alvarez, the Marketing Director. We're going to try a little bit of a different format today. We're going to do, it's going to be more conversational. As he's presenting and as I see your questions come in, I will interject and ask questions as he's going through the presentation. And I'd love your feedback to hear if that works for you or how you liked it. So this is what we're going to be covering today. Notify email, notify URL, and what those mean for you. We're going to dive into it here shortly and cover at a very high level what that means for you and how you can use it, and then dive into the details.
Okay. Alrighty, well, thanks, Mike. We're going to get started showing you guys a little bit about how these actions work. These new features are something that is really exciting. Like Mike said, it's a first for Mozenda, and to kind of give you an understanding of it, it's sort of the first time that Mozenda is allowing users to interact with the agent as it's scraping, both to receive data and in some aspects to be able to send data back to the agent. So there's a couple different use cases for why you might want this behavior. We're going to kind of show you a couple of basic ones today, and then we'll kind of leave it up to your imagination to decide how else you could use these new features. So we're going to start out by opening up an agent that I built out. It's a very simple one. So we'll open that in the agent builder, and then I'll start showing you a little bit about what the agent is doing right now, how we want to improve the process, and how first the notify email action helps us meet that improvement. So we'll get that open, and it's a very simple agent. Like I said, notify email and notify URL will be best used when agents are more complex, very process heavy. But for the sake of being able to demo it to you guys today, I'll keep it simple with this agent here. So this particular agent loads this web page and comes through and displays a list of cameras, list of products that a user might be interested in.
So Ben, real quick, at a very high level, how would you describe notify email and also notify URL? What's the difference between them? And at a high level, how would you use each one of them?
Yeah, great question, Mike. So yeah, that's probably good to dig into before we actually get into this agent. So there are two actions that we've introduced, the notify email action and the notify URL action. At a very high level, and you'll see this as we start working with them, the notify email action allows a human user to receive real-time updates from their agent via email and respond to it dynamically. Whereas the notify URL kind of interacts directly with the server or with some database that has an API that you can send a URL to interact with. So notify email is more for human interaction with the agent to perform some type of logic that you would decide on the fly. And notify URL would be used to interact with some server or some database that will perform logic for you. Does that answer your question, Mike?
So Mozenda can actually push the information to your database now rather than waiting for the information to be downloaded at the end of an agent run. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And this is going to make a lot more sense once we actually get to building it and show you guys what's going on. But Mike's right on the money there that it essentially allows you to get real-time updates as each product is collected rather than waiting for the whole thing to finish and then go publish the data or export it.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's jump into notify email.
Awesome. So like I was saying before, this particular agent, it's very simple. It's coming through it. I created a list off of these product titles, and I also captured the price, and I also captured the URL. Now, this agent you can see has a total of 247 items. For the purpose of this demo, we're not going to paginate, meaning we're just going to do this first page, the first 5 items. That'll be a little bit quicker so we can actually get through the whole demo today. But keep in mind that when you're doing this at scale, it will be even more useful when you use Notify Email and Notify URL. So to set up this scenario a little bit to help understand how Notify Email is going to help us, let's say that you are a user who wants to create an agent that scrapes these camera listings and clicks into each one to actually go to the product details page and gather more information from it. So when you have 247 items, all of a sudden you're talking about adding a click item here that has to click into 247 things. But what if you already know right away that maybe if the price is over $1,000, you're not interested. You're looking for cameras under $1,000. You're going to spend a lot of time and processing credits going into unnecessary items if you don't have that type of logic set up, which Notify Email is going to help us implement. So I want to show you a Part 2 agent. Some of you are familiar with, you can see this one's Part 1. Some of you are familiar with some of the structures that we recommend at Mozenda, which is to occasionally split agents into 2 different agents, essentially. So this one would come through and gather all the URLs for each link. And then the second one, which I'll go to right now, Part 2, will open up. And then we'll go back to Part 1, but I just want to show you what Part 2 is doing so that you guys can understand how this is going to benefit us. So Part 2 loads all the data from Part 1 using this data list, loads each URL, and then captures the product details. So the higher scale benefits of this is if you, for example, have a site that has 247 listings and you're clicking or loading each product details page one by one, you're looking at a lot of time. So generally we'll recommend you split this into 2 agents so that the first agent goes really quick, captures all the URLs, and then the second agent simply uses what could potentially kick off multiple jobs and load multiple URLs at the same time, which would save you a lot of time in processing. So you can see this one, it's really simple. Sorry, let me show you. You'll just right click on the data list and go to properties. And you can see that it's pulling the data from the Part 1 agent. So here's our next scenario where we're going to actually start talking about Notify Email now, which is well, look, we already see that there's 3 items right here that are well over $1,000, and we're not interested in that. So, you ask yourself the question, why even bother loading the URLs for these 3 to get more data if you already know you're not interested? Especially if right here we just have 1 more page, but what if there was several more pages, which is a lot of processing in terms of credits and time. So it'd be nice, right, if you could limit it to just the ones that you're actually interested in. That's what Notify Email is going to help with.
So sort of at a high level, a use case description for this would be maybe you're actually looking at used cameras and you're looking for specific information in the description that gets sent to your email if it meets a certain criteria. And then what you do is, if it meets that criteria, as you read that email, you get that notification, then you can interact with the agent for it to actually do further scraping if you want it to. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. So especially because we have it split into 2 agents now, we're going to be able to perform some logic that's really cool, and we'll dig right into that. And then the second agent will then only process the things that you've indicated are of value to you.
Now you said split into 2 agents. I know that we have a feature in our enterprise account that allows you to create multiple agents. Is this, are splitting up these 2 agents, is this a feature that's available on all account types?
Splitting it into 2 agents, yes, that is available on all accounts. It's most beneficial for our enterprise clients because they do have the sequences feature, which essentially will let you run the first agent, and then as soon as it finishes, it'll run the second agent, which is reliant and dependent on the first agent's data. This isn't, well, better said, it still can be done in a subscriptions user's account who doesn't have access to the sequencer, but they would just have to run the first agent and schedule the second one to run quite a bit later after they know for a fact that the Part 1 agent has finished. and it would still work the same. The sequencer just makes it a little bit more fluid and a little bit easier to use.
Okay, so any account can split two agents. Any account can split two agents and use this as you're describing it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so I've opened up our part 1 agent again really quick, and so now we're going to get to the fun part and start discussing Notify Email. So the first thing we're going to do is come up to our Add Action list, and we're going to come down here. You may have seen it already, but there's a Notify Email action right here. So we're going to add that action. We're going to send it to an email address. We'll create that action. Oops. I'm going to drag it right here because what needs to happen is our agent needs to begin and capture the product, price, and URL. And then what it's going to do is send this information in an email to this email address.
So maybe a lot of people didn't see what you did. You actually dragged that line down to that level, right?
Yeah, when I created it, I had accidentally created it up here on the top.
Right.
But you want to be sure that you do have it within the list after it's already captured the items. And so it'll do this for each item that it's finding, all 5.
That's the sequence of events of what that scraper will do, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. So we're going to add a couple other actions now. So the first one is the Notify Email action, and it is going to send us these 3 values to an email. The next action we're going to add is down here. You may have used wait seconds before, but you may not have noticed that there's a new aspect of it. If you go to the wait seconds, right click and go to properties, there's now an option at the bottom that allows you to wait up to a certain amount of time for a parameter to be passed through. And in this scenario, for example, when we're trying to decide if we want more information about a camera, we're going to call this field approved. And for sake of simplicity, which you're going to see in a minute here, we're going to call this one approved email. So essentially what's going to happen, the logic so far is it's going to come through, it's going to capture the product name, the price, and the URL. And it's going to send you an email with those values. Then as a user, I can look at those values, determine if the item in question is something valuable to me, and then I'll be able to send a parameter back, which we're going to see in just a minute here, with a name of approved email. And then we're going to be able to add one more action that will actually add our response as a field to the agent. So we're going to come right here and we're going to add an action. We're going to choose capture custom value. And we're going to call this field just approved. And the value we're going to pass in is our parameter that is going to be provided by the email response from the user. So we called that approved email. If you haven't used parameters before, I'd recommend that you take some time, and they're simple to use and they're really useful. I'd recommend you take some time and give our support team a call and ask for a little training on it. But essentially, if you put this within percentage signs, we're declaring this name as a parameter. So what's going to happen, one more time to step through the logic, it's going to capture these values. It'll send this email address an email indicating or sending these values with it. It'll wait 120 seconds for you to respond to that email using a link that we'll see that actually comes in the email. And when you respond to the email, it will add the value that you respond to this new field we have called approved. So hopefully that's starting to make some sense for you. It'll make a lot more sense once we actually run the agent. One thing I did want to mention is that the Notify Email action won't actually send an email when you're just testing it in the agent builder. So we will need to save this and then run it in our web console for this behavior to behave as desired. Reason being is that the purpose of the Notify actions is to be able to get real-time data as it's running, and so it's not necessarily useful in the agent building aspect. So with that, we've got our agent built. It's going to notify us. So now let's come back over to our web console, and we are going to run the agent. And we're going to see, keep an eye up here on my tab indicating the email. We're going to see as it runs that it'll send an email up here that we'll be able to respond to. We'll just give it a minute as it kicks off the job. I think we already mentioned this. Be sure to, if you have any questions, feel free to chat those into us. Mike will be firing off some of those questions that you guys might be sending in throughout the webinar, and then we'll try to address as many as we can depending on time at the end as well. So just keep that in mind.
So what you're doing right now is you're actually clicking the refresh button on the left side, because sometimes when you have a blank screen here, if you want to see some of the data that's come through before it finishes, you just click the refresh button to refresh that page, right?
Yeah, exactly. So right now it's running, and it should be sending me an email pretty soon. There we go. So what's happening, the agent's running, it saw the notify email action, and it sent me this email. And this email, when we open it, you'll see, if you come down here to context content, it'll tell us the values of what's been captured. So the product name, the price, the URL. And so right off the bat, as a user, I say, hey, this is a pretty cheap camera. It's something I can afford. I'm going to go ahead and click this Launch Mozenda, enter parameters for this job link, which will open a new window, which is going to let me send back a value. So I'm going to send here, and I'm going to say, yes, approve this product, this listing, because I am interested in it. And I'll click Submit. So now when we come back to our web console and refresh again, we'll now see that the item was captured and our value that we passed in shows up as part of the fields. So we're going to get a couple now, because it's a quick agent, so it's going to fire a whole bunch off at me really quick. This one's a little bit more expensive, right? So we're going to click the same link again. This one's $1,600. And we're going to say, no, don't approve this one. And we'll click Submit right there. And then close these tabs. And then we'll get another one. So we're going to get 5. Remember, this one is also a little bit expensive. And maybe you don't want to type no every time. Maybe this time we're going to type not interested. And then we'll click Submit. Close that, and we should have about 2 more. This one is still pretty expensive. We're going to say, no, don't approve this one. And hit send. And then we'll get one more right here. And this one is a pretty good deal, right? $600. So we're going to go ahead and on this one also approve this one. So at that point we will have approved, or we will, there was 5 products that we were looping through. So if we go back to our web console, we're going to see that we have 5 items here. We've got the 2 that we approved, the 2 we said no, the 1 that we said not interested. And so now you're kind of getting a feel for how Notify Actions work, and it's really cool. And we're going to take it a step further to show how this actually benefits us in the Part 2 agent. But also keep in mind that it's nice because you can see this agent's still finishing up and it's refreshing, and it wouldn't have published you the data yet. But in our scenario now, you've already gotten all the data. So that's one benefit. And then the next benefit that I'm going to show you guys is that we can now create a view on this data so that the Part 2 agent only loads the pages that hold the words yes under the approved field. So if you haven't used views before, this might be a little bit new, but if you come just over here to this gears drop down right here and click it, and we are going to select the option to copy the default view. You can also create a new view. I'm going to choose copy because it retains all the same fields you can see that the default view has. So it's got item ID, product, price, URL approved. I found it's just a little bit easier to copy it. But we're going to call this view approved. Get rid of this description. And then in the criteria, we're going to say, okay, in this view, we only want items such that the approved field has the word, equals the word, yes.
And are these case sensitive?
Yes, they are. I believe they are case sensitive. So you'll probably want to make sure that it's exact on there. Now, if you don't want to worry about having to provide case sensitive responses, you could theoretically add multiple criteria here so that you could have a couple backups in case you might accidentally type something wrong.
So what you're saying is you would create one that has capital YES and
then maybe
and lowercase YES, right?
Yeah, maybe another one that says this, or maybe just contains the word yes, and you add it because maybe you want to be a little bit more specific. Maybe you want to say yes, I absolutely want this, right? And so you can say and or. So if it holds capital yes or lowercase yes. So we'll hit save on that view, and we're now going to see that in this approved view we're only seeing the 2 items that are actually of value to us. So as we jump back over to our Part 2 agent and open it in the agent builder, so we'll open it, give it just a minute to load up.
So I think it's important to note that right now you're actually in the agent builder, and you did the setup inside of the web console. Is that correct?
Correct. So essentially we have the first agent that we created that allowed us to specify which products we're interested in, which ones we wanted to approve. And now we want to go into this agent builder for the Part 2 agent, and we want to modify this data list. So we'll right click it and go to properties. You can see right now it's still getting all 5 values, but that's because we're still looking at the default view. So if we come back into the web console, come up to this, we'll go over to the Part 1 agent. Currently it's still looking at, in this drop down you go back to default, it's still looking at the default view, but we want to change it so that it's only looking at the approved view. So back in the agent builder, we're going to want to change the list we're looking at. So we'll click select, and you can see that there's 2 collections or 2 items that show up for this same agent for Part 1, but we want to specifically choose this approved view, and we'll click OK. So now our Part 2 agent is only going to click these 2 that we've approved. So just like that, you found a way to essentially interact with your agent, give it some feedback, and say, here's what I'm interested in. Don't perform any more processing on the stuff that's not relevant, and only move forward with the stuff that is relevant. So hopefully this gave you guys a brief understanding of how the notify email action works.
Ben, you know what? This opens up a whole new world of possibilities. There's one agent interacting with a human, and then it's talking to another agent and telling it what to do. So something I just thought of, it's not a business case, but let's say, for example, my bank account. And I want to scrape my bank account every day because I want to see what my daughter's spending her money on. She has a credit card on my account, right? But in order for me to get into my account, my bank is actually going to send me some sort of authentication text. Mm-hmm. And it's going to give me a code. So am I able to interact with the agent to allow the agent into my bank account by inputting that code that I get as a text message, and I'm going to get that notification through my email?
Yeah, exactly. That's we have actually seen that use case or use cases similar to that in play already. That certain websites might require that you respond to some type of security question or something like that to really identify, for your own privacy, to identify that it is you interacting with it. And so the addition of being able to add some human interaction in the agent allows you to essentially receive a capture that tells you the question, and then you can respond to the agent with the answer, and it'll move forward knowing that you've given it permission to do so.
That's great. Thank you, Ben.
Awesome. So, like I said, this was meant to be a brief overview of the notify email action. I'm imagining some of you may already have some ideas on how you might want to use this yourself, but especially in things that are going to be scaled or in things that might just require a little bit of more authentication, like that scenario Mike presented, notify email is really helpful for that. So if you have any more questions about notify email, feel free to send those in. I'm going to go ahead and jump over and explain a little bit more about notify URL now, which is a similar action, but has a little bit different implementation. So we're going to go over to another agent that I created. This one right here, notify URL. And we'll open this one up in the agent builder. So as I mentioned earlier, the notify URL action doesn't communicate with a human. It communicates with it fires off a URL, and you could pass data through the URL as well. but it sends it straight to maybe a server that's awaiting some type of API call that it might be kicking off, or a database that is going to be using it. So a little bit of a different scenario for this one. Let's imagine that maybe you do have 247 items. In the current setup, or rather before Notify Actions, what you had to do was essentially wait until all items were collected, and once they were collected, the report refresh job would, that purple status that says refreshing, you'd have to wait for that to finish, and then you could export or publish it to whatever you want, to add it to some external database or something like that. What Notify URL allows you to do is get access to that data immediately by sending it straight to some URL that you provide it and passing in the parameters to it. So we'll show you a little bit how that works today. We're going to use it in a scenario that's probably not going to be super common that you guys will use, which is just writing the data to another collection in Mozenda. More than anything, we just want to show you a little bit about how it works. It's going to be used a little bit differently when you guys are actually implementing it, and it will probably require that you have at least some development skill to be able to set up some server that can handle these URLs being kicked off. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go create another collection really quick, almost like a dummy collection that's emulating this one. So we're going to go over to our Collections tab in the Web Console, and we're going to create a new collection from scratch, and we'll call this one Notify URL Database. And we're going to add some fields to it. Just like the other one, we've got the product. We've got the product and the price. We won't worry about URL. What I'm going to do, just to make it clear as we're writing to it later, I'm going to append these with DB for database to make it a little bit simpler when we're comparing between the two collections. So I'll create this collection. And essentially what we're going to do to demo how the Notify URL action works is we're going to use one of Mozenda's API calls, which I'm going to teach you guys about today really briefly. It's called the collection.addItem API, which will essentially let you add any item with specified fields to a collection. And in this case, we're going to add it to this collection here. So I'm going to open up to our API page really quick. So there's a little bit of prep work here required so that we can really show you how Notify URL works. But we're going to start by coming here to our API page. If you haven't used the API page or the Mozenda API before, I'd encourage you, just like I mentioned earlier about parameters, reach out to our support team. They're more than happy to give you a quick training on how it works. So we're going to come down here to the collection.addItem API call. And I'll try to be as brief as I can about this because this isn't entirely the purpose of the training, but I'll give you a little bit of understanding of our API. We're going to copy this example request URL for the collection.addItem API. So I'm copying that. I'm just going to come paste it up here just for safekeeping right now. So each API call has different parameters that we're going to send through to it. So we're going to kind of step through this. Most of these are okay, but for example, our web service key is going to be different. This is a dummy web service key. To find your web service key, you just go to this little drop down over here, and you go to Account Settings, and you go to the Users tab. You select your user, and you go to the API tab right here, and here's your web service key. If it's all zeros, it means that you don't have one. It's easy enough. You just click Generate a new web service key, and it'll generate one for you. So we're going to copy this web service key. We're going to go back over to our API, and we're going to modify it to be this new one. Perfect. So then let's keep reading through the API. You won't need to change this parameter. You also won't need to change this one because this is exactly what we're doing. We're doing a collection.addItem operation. But we do need to change the collection ID to be the ID of the collection that we are going to be adding an item to. So remember that we made, close that and we'll go back to it. Remember that we made this new collection. So the agent ID is 1017. So I'm going to come back over here, sorry, the collection ID. And I'm going to change this to 1017. And we're going to leave these on here for now, but essentially we're going to be changing these to equal the fields that we're actually writing to. So with that, we're going to step into the agent builder again and get started with Notify URL. So I'm copying our API call, going back to the agent builder. And just after we capture product, URL, and price, we're going to add an action. And this time we're going to add notify URL, which is right here. And we'll read this together because it'll help with the rest of the API call. It says right here that notify URL actions will send along any data and images that have been captured for the list item and are provided as parameters in the URL. To use this feature, add a replacement in the URL where you want the value to appear. And then it gives some examples. So I'll paste our API call right here. You can see, and we'll get to the end. And what we actually want to do is change these values here to actually be the fields that we want to write to and the values we want to write to those fields. So I'm going to delete up to here, and we're going to step back into our collection over here. And remember that the fields we have are product DB and price DB. So we're going to say field.productDB equals, and we're going to use a parameter again to pass in this product value. So we're going to say field.productDB equals product and field.priceDB equals price.
And these are also, this URL is also case sensitive, right?
Correct, yeah. So you'll want to make sure that you're following the exact case sensitivity of the collection you're writing to, as well as the capture names over here. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so just like that, we've got an API call here that's essentially using notify URL, going to capture these values and then call our API call to write them to the other collection where we've been that we created. So we're going to create action here, and we don't need to add any other steps here. We're just going to save the agent. Just want to comment that just like notify email, the notify URL action also doesn't actually notify if you're just testing it in the agent builder. So you do need to save it and then run it in the web console for it to start sending the data over. So we'll come over here now. So now what we're going to see is if we go back to our agent and we run it, which I'm going to do right now, we're going to see in our harvesting results here that it's going to start getting data, but at the same time that it's getting data here, each time it gets a new item, it's going to call out the collection.addItem API and also write data to our notify URL database. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to keep hitting refresh until we start seeing stuff. Once again, keep in mind, obviously in this scenario it might not be entirely beneficial because of the fact that that this is still internal to Mozenda, and so you can either see it in harvesting results or, oh, there you go, we got our items, or you can see it here. But generally when you're using notify URL, you'll probably want to use it to send it somewhere else, not to Mozenda, but this was just for demo purposes. So you can see that as it collected each item, in addition to putting it in the harvesting results over here, it was also firing off a URL to write them to our other collection. Oops. Over here. Just like that, you can see and kind of imagine you've actually got, over 200, maybe over 1,000, maybe over 1,000,000 items that you're going through. And it might not quite be practical to go through all of them before finally getting your data published. Using notify URL, you can send the data as soon as you have it and ship it out to some server that's awaiting the URL that's coming through. So that kind of gives the overview of the notify URL action. So hopefully that gives you a brief understanding of how it works. And just like the notify email, I imagine you might have some other ideas that it could be used for.
So on this notify URL, this is pretty exciting as well, because this is the first time we're allowing data to be pushed to other people's databases or servers. Before today, we were only allowing people to finish the agent and then publish it internally, and then they'd have to download these files. So we have a couple of questions having to do with notify email. Let's cover those real quick.
Yeah, Mike, might I interject? I forgot to show you guys one slide that I thought was important as well. Because one of the things that's really nice, especially about the notify email action, is that you can interact with it literally wherever you have internet. So right in here, you'll see this is just an example of, here's a user who was able to get the notify email straight to their phone, was able to load the URL and send the value back. So just keep in mind that one of the exciting things about this is you can do it on the fly. You can do it anywhere. You don't have to be sitting at your computer waiting for the data to come. You can do it when it's convenient for you, where it's convenient for you.
This is a perfect segue to the two questions that are being asked. Number one is, what happens if you set the wait time for human interaction for 120 seconds or however many seconds you set it to? What happens if that time expires and there's no human interaction with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That will actually depend on how you've set up your error handling settings. So generally, if you to kind of keep it without getting too complex, if you set your error handling settings such to stop on errors like that, it'll end up actually throwing an error saying that a parameter never came, even though we specified that a parameter should come. But if you don't care about that error, and it just means that it wasn't important enough for you to actually respond to, it would skip over it and just leave the field blank rather than providing a response to it. Keep in mind also that you can up that wait time quite high, actually, and so we have a lot of people, right, who maybe don't have time to sit there every second checking to see if they get a new email like it was for this scenario. So you might bump it up to 15 minutes or something like that before you actually are obligated to respond, before it makes that decision of throw an error or skip it and make it an empty field.
So the other question is a valid question. It's notify email is probably hard to scale because it requires human interaction. But at the same time, I don't think there's another technology out there that would allow you to have human interaction with the web data that you're scraping. So it gives you a lot of benefits, but it's what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so obviously you do have to keep in mind that when you do use notify email, especially if you're trying to actually respond to it, that there is a little bit of human interaction that's required, which might take a little bit of time, might require some effort. But like Mike said, this enables our users and enables everyone who are using these actions to take the best of both the agent automation aspect of it, and then also add in what almost can't be replaced sometimes, which is actual human logic and thinking. So it does require some interaction, but that's kind of the beauty of it, is that you're actually able to get data from your agent, make a decision real time based on what you're thinking in the moment, and then respond to it just like that.
Yeah, something that we've never seen before, and that we think is highly beneficial. There's one more question. Oh, well, actually, go ahead and let us read this question real quick. This will be the last one for today.
Gotcha. Yeah, so we just got one more question that somebody asked that says, so if you use another server instead, do you still put in the Mozenda API, or are we supposed to use another API? That's a great question. So the example I used today with the Mozenda API was exclusively so that we could demo it for you guys. I would imagine that you wouldn't be using the Mozenda API when you're actually going to be using notify URL. Reason being, because if you're using the Mozenda API to send it just into Mozenda, you might as well just go look at your harvesting results, because it'll be almost identical. So the real benefit would lie if you have a server open, and this, like I mentioned earlier, does require some development skill to be able to handle this. But you would essentially set up a server that could await some URL being sent to it, and you would send the data to an external server. So you wouldn't use the Mozenda API, is what I would imagine most of you would find use for this with.
That's excellent. This is very exciting news, great features. Our developers have been hard at work getting this to this point to be able to get it into your hands. As a marketing department, we would love to hear your feedback, not just on this webinar, on this new format that we're using. It's a two-way interaction sort of webinar. Did you like it, or did you like the previous format better? And then the last thing is, I personally would love to hear how it is that you use these features, and if you would like to get featured on a guest blog post, would love to interview you to see how you're using this and to get some exposure for your company on this. Feel free to email webinar@mozenda.com or marketing@mozenda.com. Happy to answer any questions that you have, and also would love to hear some of your feedback as well. Thanks for your time today, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. Wanted to also just point out, if you do still have some questions about these actions, as they are new, and a lot of you might be getting into some stuff that you haven't tried before, reach out to our support team. They're more than happy to help you out and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ben.
Alrighty.
Take care.